Welcome back to the Ripewave audio community. My name is John, and for this video, we're going to take a look at Arcam's new range of 8K capable AV processor and receivers that they announced on February 28th, 2022. And we'll be comparing against the existing models. And before we get into it, just a little bit about Arcam. Now, we haven't really done a dedicated Arcam video before. We've included their products and other summaries of AV processors, receivers at different price points and as different channel counts. And here we are looking at it again at these 16 channel models. And what's the heritage on this company? Well, it was founded in 1976 by two students at Cambridge University in England. When they were developing their first products, they called themselves Amplification Recording in Cambridge, but later shortened it to A&R Cambridge. And of course, we now know them as Arcam, which is what they've been using since 1980. Their first products was an integrated amplifier called the A60, and it was, to compete with the likes of NAD. And it has the same sleek look that they embody today. Arcam remained their own entity until 2012 when they were sold to Canadian-based Jam Industries, but then later was sold to Harman in 2017, just after Harman was acquired by Samsung Electronics. So here we are under the Samsung regime of Arcam ownership and taking a look at what they've released. Now, this isn't the first iteration they've released since they were Samsung. So now we know that Samsung is keeping the line going, and let's see what they've done with this. First, we'll look at the processor. Now, we had the AV40, and this was introduced in 2019, as well as all the other preceding models came out in 2019. And they were, for the most part, 16-channel models except for one. And the processor, of course, has no amplification. And, it looked like this with the release in 2019. And now with the new model, the AV41, they just incremented the numbers up one from 40 to 41, etc. And we see that there is a price increase from $4,500 up to $5,250 US. And it looks pretty much the same. First look here, it's the same cosmetics. And with the side-by-side comparison, which is the easiest way to look, we really had to look carefully to see anything different. And what's different is that little badge on the far left towards the bottom that has the model number. So they did increment that up from AV40 to AV41, and we'll see that all in the subsequent models. So on the front, that is the only change we could see. Turning around the back, I couldn't even see a difference. In fact, if this image was better, I may be able to see the small print, but nothing even coming out close to showing me the model number or anything. But yeah, this looks like the exact same layout on the back on the AV41 upgrade. And just a quick note here, Arcam is the basis for the other Hammond models. And of course, you have JB Synthesis with their SDP35 and SDP55, and the Lexicon, the MC10. And these all look very similar as well. So just a reminder there, but we haven't seen any announcements, any updates from these other Harman models. Those remain 4K models. So Arcam is the first within the Harman family to adopt 8K capability. I'll also note that Arcam does supply products as an OEM to white label for audio control, and that's on their Maestro X9 and Maestro X7. And again, no 8K capability yet or announcement from audio control either. So we'll be paying attention to those other branded products. Let's look further down the Arcam model range. So you get into the AVRs, AVR, they all start AVR 30, and this was $6,000 as released in 2019. It had 7 channels of amplification, as do all the receivers from Arcam have 7 channels, but they're at different power outputs. We're including here focusing on the all 7 channels driven specification, and we're glad that Arcam does include the all channels driven rating. Now they also give you the 2 channel driven rating. This particular model with all 7 channels driven is 100 watts per channel. Now at 2 channels driven, they rate this at 140 watts, and we're giving this for the 8 ohm impedance rating, which is the lower of the set. As we saw with the processor model, when we turn to the brand new AVR31, we see no differences cosmetically. We're seeing the exact same power rating, the number of channels, everything looking just about the same on the physical side of these products. And side by side, we do not see anything more when the badge change as well, but we do see that price increase once again. So from $6,000 now for $6,900, which is a considerable jump up. And turning around the back, the same story. So the Arcam website is still showing both the previous generation and this new generation. So we were able to grab specifically the right images for both, just trying to be really careful we're not missing any differences. Now, the AVR20, very similar, but what they're doing here is lowering the wattage. So instead of being 100 watts per channel, all channels driven, now this one's 90 watts. And if we were looking at the 2 channel driven rating for 8 ohms, it's 125 watts. And you've got the AVR21, no changes in the output capability. And again, it's looking the same except for the badge. And side by side, it's the same. It's the same, but we see the price. Now, this isn't as big of a jump as we move down the line. This was $4,000, now $4,700. And around the back, no changes. The AVR10 is the entry-level model that they introduced in 2019. This is 60 watts 7-channel driven or 85 watts 2 channels driven. Now the difference here from the other models is this drops down to a 14 channel instead of a 16 channel receiver. So this is the only one that doesn't deliver 16 channels of processing. And when I say processing, and if you followed this channel all along, I'm very careful about we're not meaning the amplification. This is channels of processing, and we group in here all the base level, the height channels, and the number of discrete subwoofers that it processes. So I don't care if there's 2, 3, 4, or more subwoofer connections on the back of the unit. I count that as 1 if they're all wired in parallel. So here, this one's 14, the others are 16. Looking at side by side, the 2 generations of the entry level, no changes, just the badge. On the back, the same story. So Arcam is really focusing on the internal for this new generation. And in this case, in the entry level, there was a price increase as well. This one went from $2,750 to $3,050 for the 2022 release. And of course, we all know that supply issues, inflation, etc., you can expect some increase. We do feel like maybe manufacturers are taking a little more than the normal increases nowadays, but most of them are doing it, like it or not. Now let's look at the whole range all together. So side by side, the AV41 processor and the full set of receivers from the 31 down to the 11, and they all look the same, front and back. Maybe some subtle differences on the back. We're going to get into that with the I/O checks. But what we always do first is take a little look at a few other things. Now, I always like to know what it looks like underneath. I know that doesn't always translate into sound quality and everything, but I think a lot of us are curious what it looks like with the hood off. Now, I can't show you the latest generation. We don't have those pictures yet, but if prior generations and products show, I have this Lexicon MC10 and the prior generation AV40 from Arcam. And these two look very similar inside. You can see that they're developed from the same design with the toroid and all of these models that are Harman Arcam derived. And yeah, this is what you expect. The chassis, although it looks a little different cosmetically on the front, and when you look inside, this is where really the similarities start to really show through there. Taking a deeper look at the formats and channels that these support. And I've done a little something different with the color coding here that we have in prior, because it was really tricky to follow. And I've always had this trouble with the Harman manuals. First of all, they group the whole range into one manual. So everything from the processors and the receivers and every model in there, everything is included in one manual or handbook, as they call it. And they include every language in there. And they don't really get into the details. They leave a lot to the imagination. I have to read through this several times to really make sure I'm getting it right. The way I've interpreted this has evolved over the time, so you might see some differences of how I reported this before. I think I'm closer now with how I'm reporting this. You let me know if we're doing a good job. But these are all 9.1.6 processors and receivers, except for the AVR10 and 11, which are 9.1.4. So you lose 2 channels with the entry-level range. Now, the color coding for the processors, anything that's gray, is not powered by the unit. So subwoofers are all gray in most cases. Every case that I've seen with a processor or receiver to date, unpowered, going out to the subwoofer, so those are always gray. But for the 41 and the 40, those are also gray, and the blue color indicates some choices because it's capable of doing front wides or 6 height channels, but that's an option. So when it's optional, I color it blue. So you have a choice of 6 on the heights or front wides, which then drops the heights down to 4. That starts to make sense. Now with the receivers is a power element. They don't have an amplifier for every channel of processing. So where they do have an amplifier, we color orange. So of course you're going to get the front stage 3 channels, you're going to get the surround, you're going to get at least one of the heights powered, but then you have a choice for that last 2 channels of amplification. Are you going to use that for another set of heights, or are you going to do that for a surround back set of channels? And there's another choice, and that we're coloring red now. This is kind of a new feature of the infographic that we've created here. And so it's still 9.1.6 as its maximum capability, but it all depends on how you configure this. It's 9.1.6 as with the processor, but keep in mind that you don't have that amplification for all those channels. You are going to use external amplification if you're going to fully come out with a 9.1.6 system there. So keep that definitely in mind. With the AVR10 and 11, We drop some of the height channels. You're not going to be able to do 6 on the height, but you still have those choices as well. When it comes to format support, they all are Dolby Atmos. They are DTS:X capable. None of them support DTS:X Pro despite the number of channels they have. And they are Atmos 3D capable. So that's good news for some of you who really like the Atmos upmixing despite the limited source material that's out there. They all have a headphone jack on the front, but it's an 8-inch phone. So come on, I wish you did a full quarter inch. I think it's done more for aesthetics purposes than functional purposes there. The other thing I will note here, because some of these are covered in other sections, is they have AM/FM tuners, that they have removable power cords on all of them, no cheapening there down the range. They all have the binding posts that we'd like to see, no spring clips. Because it was so complicated for us to figure this all out, I wanted to show you from a point of view how we sorted this out for the graphic and for each model. So if we look at this, they have these configurable channels on some of the models, or most of the models, and here we're representing those in blue. Those are channels 13 through 16, and you can configure these as either your third height channels, front wides, or for subwoofers. But we read the manual. These are not independently controlled subwoofers. It's just a convenience item to let you plug in multiple subwoofers if you configure it as such, and then it's wired in parallel. We've also showing here that there's some powered outputs for your receivers that are fixed configuration. They're going to be front, left, right, and center, as well as your surround channels. Where it becomes optional is around the surround back, the height one, and the zone one. And here we've indicated in red that those two channels on the AVRs are configurable to choose whether you're going to use it for surround back, height 1, or zone 1. I think on the AVR10 and 11, it's not configurable for zone 1, just for height 1 and surround back. But nevertheless, that's how we're showing it here. And then the subwoofers, there are 2 ports that are labeled for subwoofer. Again, they're wired in parallel, but you can see those in green here. So just a little further insight on how this is done. And you can see how they've removed on the AVR11 and the AVR10 the additional channels 13 through 16 that are plugged in through the RCA phono jacks. Getting back to our summary here, and this time we're going to look at Imex Enhance. This is interesting because we know that this range always had Imex Enhance since 2019. We're not seeing it on the marketing literature for Arcam on their web pages, but those who are selling it are talking about Imex Enhance. The manuals still list Imex Enhance. There's a little ambiguity there. But let's just assume that they have it. They had it before, and the manual's alluding that it's there. They talk about having Imex Enhance modes. So maybe they're just pending some final certification, but I believe it's in there. Dolby Vision is supported by all these, as it was in the past, and there is still Dirac Live, but you have to purchase the base option separately from Dirac if you want that enhancement. None of these are THX certified. As we said in the past, that's only Onkyo Integra in the world of AV processors and receivers. Looking at the DACs, they've continued with the ESS Saber DAC. Why switch with all those problems there? And ESS is regarded as a good DAC. And the 9026 Pro is a good chip, a 32-bit chip. They're using 2 of these. So they specify, in the ESS literature, this is like 140 dBs. What Arcam specifies on the output, what it's able to do with that is give you 93 dBs, or if you're using the direct button, that gives you 110. So there's a difference as your normal home theater use versus the direct stereo channel in. That gives you more. THD on the output of negative 100 dBs. The PCM is going to give you 24,192. So that's good. Now, while this DAC is, and that's built into this, capable of doing DSD, Arcam and all the other Harman brands and audio control don't mention DSD support. So we're going to have to assume that they haven't put the software in to give you DSD decoding, and that's a disappointment. On the I/O, great to see that they've continued to have a large amount of HDMI inputs and outputs, even though this is now moved to 8K. So it's 7 in and 3 out on these, except for the AVR10 and 11, which drops an output. So you only get 2 outputs on the HDMI for those entry levels. But otherwise, these are the same. They got eARC capability for one of the outputs, and it gives you, 4 coax in, 2 optical out, and 1 optical out, which is unusual because usually if you're doing an output digital, it's usually coax, not optical. I would have rather seen coax on that choice, but of course things are moving more HDMI going forward. There's no Xlr Balanced Inputs on these products. So if you have a good quality DAC that's doing balanced outputs or a phono stage, you're not going to be able to plug balance into any of these models. So that's another disappointing aspect if you're there. And you're not going to have any of the AAS EBU inputs as well. When it comes to pre-outs, they're giving you the full 16 on the traditional unbalanced RCA phono connectors, which is good. And on the processor version there, the 41 and the 40, you get Xlr balanced output. Thank you for doing that. That's nice. If you're going to process, you've got the room on the back of the panel. So why don't you put that in there? So that's really good. Arcam continues to put some analog inputs. They give you 6 of them, which is a healthy amount in today's day. They're giving you 1 set of RCA outputs as well as a zone. On the RCA outputs, they're giving you 1 + 1 zone, except for the entry level where they're not giving you the zone output. They're just giving you 1 fixed output there. No legacy video out or in, and no phono stage built into this product. There are triggers, there are 2 infrared, and on the video section, now we talked about these all having 7 and 3, except for the Arcam introductory 10 and 11 receivers, which have 2. The difference now, when going from generations, is the prior generation was 4K, and now it is 8K capable. So that's for all the channels. That's good to see. Now those early brands that came out with 8K, they gave you very limited support, but now it's good to see that brands are giving you across all inputs and outputs that same HDMI 2.1 capability. These new models do have HDR10 and HDR10 Plus, which we didn't see any literature that showed HDR support in the prior generation. So it's good that they're indicating that now, but they're not telling us the details, what parts of the HDMI 2.1 spec they're supporting. They're not telling us if they're supporting variable refresh rate, quick media switching, audio latency, low latency mode, etc. I think they're supporting some of those, but they're not telling us and anything that I can find as of yet. Now this has just been announced, so maybe this will be coming in the future. They do have HDCP, the copy protection 2.3 version. As we mentioned, Dolby Vision, the IMAX, hybrid log gamma, and we assume a Rec 2020 because most processors do support that. But so there's some details that are missing here. But you can see that this is a main feature that they're adding with this update in 2022. And I will add that the 8K is 60 frames per second and the 4K is up to 120 frames per second, just like we're seeing on all the other products that are claiming support for 2.1. On the networking side, they all have Ethernet, they all have Wi-Fi, they all have Bluetooth, but they have only Bluetooth in, so your sources can come into it, but there's no Bluetooth outputs to things like headphones and speakers. On the control side, what we see is the traditional features for the integrator market, through Ethernet, through the infrared, through the RS-232 port. That's all supported. You have the triggers, as we mentioned before. They explicitly mention support for Control 4, Creston, and AMX on those integrations. Now, others might support that, but this is the one that they mention in their manual. When it comes to streaming features, the streaming ecosystems that they support, AirPlay 2, Chromecast, and Spotify Connect are all explicitly listed for these, regardless of the generation. So nothing new there. And nothing new advertised for the internet streaming. So it's definitely Spotify and Tidal that they talk about. There's others that we assume because they're giving in the manual, the brand for MQA. So that's interesting because not many products support MQA. I think NAD does, but most brands don't support it. They list this in their manual. They don't come out with it in their marketing materials. So it's still a question mark for us if they support MQA. I think the need for MQA is really diminishing now that streaming services are doing all the lossless high-res outputs. So it'll be interesting to see what the future brings for MQA. I don't think it's long-lived, personally. They also mention vTuner as a logo that they have in their manual, but they don't really get into the details and what you do with it. I kind of assume it's in there regardless. So that's what we're seeing on the internet streamings. It doesn't seem like they're doing a lot of focus there on the streaming support. We always feel it's better to handle that with an external device anyways. They've continued with the same remote for all models and for both generations. So, and this is the same remote they use for Lexicon, JBL synthesis, as well as their OEM to audio control. So no changes there. We believe these are all backlit capable remotes. Dimensions have not changed from the prior generation. These are all the same size regardless of the model. The weights do vary to some degree. They range from 10.6 kilograms up to 16.5. Of course, your processor only is going to be the lightest because you don't have those amplifiers built into it. The processor too is going to have less power consumption at 50 watts. The other ones range from 90 to 100 watts on that. And for those who are on pounds, the weight of these range from 23.4 to 36.4 pounds. But yeah, that's they're all pretty good on the weight. Anything under 20 pounds, we start to question, at least on the processor side, the quality of it. And then as things drop below 30 for this amount of channels of amplification, then we'd start to be concerned there. So these seem to be a good weight. Nothing done on the user interface to change. The front panels look the same. I'm just reusing some slides from doing this before. The on-screen display looks the same in the manual. They haven't changed anything. I'm just giving some examples here what it looks like when you go in to configure this. Of course, with Dirac, you inherit some of the Dirac user interfaces. We're not sure what they give you for on-screen pop-up messages, but this sums up the Arcam overview of what they released for 8K. From our point of view, this is largely an HDMI 2.1 8K update. We're not seeing a needle moving on anything else on this. For those who are familiar with these products, there's not a lot to new to learn for you. For those who are just getting into it, I hope this video has served you well to just really understand how Arcam develops and puts out their product, and perhaps helps you in your decisioning perspective. I wish there was a few things that they could have done in addition. It's interesting that we're not seeing a lot of brands put out a DTS:X Pro, even though they have enough channels to accommodate that. This is no different there, and we just saw the flagship come out from McIntosh, the 180 there, and that didn't have support, although its lower tier did. So what are your thoughts on this? Do you like what Arcam is doing with their product line? Did you wish to see something a little bit more? Is this hitting your expectations? That feedback would be useful to the RightWave Audio community. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to this RightWave Audio community, and be sure to hit the bell icon so you'll be notified when the next video is posted. Until then, keep evolving your audio experience.